Which teams have won the NFL offseason so far? That's what we're going to be talking about today as we return from our couple-month hiatus here on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch from a newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his work over at RotoViz. He has not been taking as much of a hiatus as me. Shawn's been doing great work over at RotoViz Overtime with Colin Kelly and writing over at RotoViz. But Shawn, we took a couple months off, and we're back. I got some questions when we be back, and a lot of asking. I mean, we have the draft here in a little more than a week. And last year we had a lot of fun doing a live draft stream. We're talking through plans for that again. A lot to catch up on between now and then because we kind of went on hiatus right after the Super Bowl. Big reason for that is I just wanted to focus on some non-football stuff. I stepped on a scale in January, and it was the largest number that I've ever seen. So I've been on a big couple-month diet. I'm down like 20 pounds. Been working out every single day. Stopped chewing tobacco. A lot of good stuff changes in my life. But, I mean, I've missed our chats. We have free agency we didn't hit. Last year we did a lot of big picture team stuff prior to free agency. Talked a lot about rookie QB contracts and what teams we thought might win the offseason. We were talking a little bit about the Eagles and the Jalen Hurts contract and how that gave them flexibility. I know we talked about the Bengals being a little bit, I mean, even though they were in the Super Bowl the year prior, usually the Super Bowl runner-up, two Super Bowl teams, they're like top 3 in odds to win the next Super Bowl, top 5. And the Bengals were like 8th. They weren't getting that credit after they made the Super Bowl run the year prior. They wind up back in the AFC Championship. And I mean, I think they were behind the Ravens most of last offseason in terms of, one of their division opponents in terms of expectations. And they proved that wasn't a fluke last year by getting all the way back to the AFC Championship. And now it's more, they're the team to beat in that division, right? So we didn't do as much of that offseason, program as we had done last year. We have so much stuff. DJ Moore got traded, Shawn. We have a lot to talk about. And just, a week and a half until the NFL draft. So we'll see how much we can get in by then. One of the things certainly we'll be doing is talking through the rookies and our stances on them so that when we do the live streams for the NFL draft, we'll have our, Sam Howell type guys that we like. But we first want to talk a little bit about the actual teams, what they've gotten accomplished in free agency, what they've gotten done. It's a wide range of possibilities. You have the teams with the rookie QB contracts that often have a lot of money to spend. They spent a lot of money. And then you have teams on the other end. The Bears have spent a ton of money. The Falcons have spent a ton of money. Then you have teams on the other end that had to cut cap and are tighter in what they're able to do and have not been able to add. In some cases, have just lost a lot of players. The Chiefs come to mind as a team that have lost some key players, but have also tried to make some additions. Yeah, a lot of movement. We'll get to that. We might just focus on the AFC in this first show, but it's a long intro aside, Shawn. How are you doing?
Good. As you mentioned, still lots of stuff going on, and Colin has done a great job just putting everything together for overtime and enjoy that so much. But yeah, jealous to hear how much success you've had with your diet. I mean, you even look sleek over there. You said no chewing, and that's absolutely fantastic. I did a pretty significant lifestyle change last summer and went down from 230 to 200, which at 6 feet tall is closer to that like college tennis range. My goal was like 175, which is the actual range. Unfortunately, then I did a second lifestyle change, which was going back to the all dessert diet, which is my favorite diet. So now I think I'm like a 240. So now we're back to like, 60, 70 pounds. But that's going to be part of this off season as well. It just hasn't happened yet. But congratulations on all of that. And yeah, I'm fired up to record, right? This is pretty exciting. We got the NFL draft just right here on the horizon. And I mean, Ben, it was heartbreaking when DJ Moore gets traded during a time period we're not recording shows. I mean, that was the move of the offseason.
To Justin Fields' scheme. Yeah, we shared a couple emails about that at that time, but yeah, I mean that's a big one. I got a lot of questions about it. I mean, it's one of the sort of concepts I've tried to talk about with regard to DJ Moore. On the show we've referred to the Stephon Diggs situation where he got moved, and he was sort of due for what I was calling for a while, like situation regression. Like we talk about regression with the stats, with the actual efficiency, with the numbers, but all the elements that impact a player's line that are the situation, whatever it is, the scheme that he's in, the quarterback he's tied to, the offense he's tied to, the coach he's tied to, the play calling, the pass rate over expected. And there's especially all of those elements for receivers. Can that player really have a ceiling in certain situations? It's not always, easy, or I guess a good way to put that is the situation can sort of dictate what the real ceiling is. And then in other situations, the ceiling can be higher. With Stephon Diggs, we talked about how he went from a situation where the way that they were using him and everything in Minnesota, especially that last year, was not really optimal for how good of his skill set was. It wasn't being used at all depths. And he goes to Buffalo, and it actually seemed like similar to the DJ Moore change. Not like a massive improvement right on its face, but Buffalo overhauls the way that they do things offensively, and it really quickly proved to be a huge improvement, where the key for the change was that, okay, this is a team that went out, traded for him, wanted to make him the alpha number one receiver, use him at all depths, and he had that skill set. We've talked about DJ Moore in the same way for a long time, that he has the ability to win at all depths. He's shown that over multiple seasons. If he could just get the volume, if he could get the role and get it all tied together, it hasn't really been the same issue as Diggs, where the Panthers haven't used him. The Panthers were willing to use him at all depths, but they've had multiple years in a row now where, like I would have said, for sort of different reasons, DJ Moore was due for some situation regression. The quarterback play, the offensive scheme, all sorts of those things, not necessarily working optimally in his favor. But I don't think it's like an immediately like, oh, this is going to be like the steps forward that the Bills took. I mean, that was like over regression, how amazing the Bills passing situation became. It's going to be tough. The Bears historically low in pass volume last year. We talked a lot about that. They're going to come back up in that, but Justin Fields, on only like 450 dropbacks or something, was tied for the league lead in sacks and led the league in scrambles. And there's basically three outcomes on a dropback: either a pass attempt, a sack, or a scramble. And even though his dropbacks weren't particularly high, his raw sacks and raw scrambles super high. So his rate of dropbacks that aren't a pass attempt is crazy high. I mean, it probably set an NFL record. We don't have like data forever on that, and if we do, I haven't looked into it. But it was something like 28% of his dropbacks were not a pass attempt this past year. You get better receivers out there that could help him, certainly, but it's not an ideal. I mean, DJ Moore looks like he's headed to another situation where I'm going to want situational regression again.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, I'm looking at the advanced team stat explorer here on RotoViz, powered by the fantastic Sports Info Solutions charting data and other data. And then it appears to me that DJ Moore went from the team that was 30th in wins above replacement in passing offense to the team that was 31st. That's right. I mean, you only had two options for going down, but he managed to get one of those.
The whole idea of regression to the mean, I guess, is maybe overplayed. If you could go from 30th down to 31st, it seems most likely if you get moved that you're going to wind up on one of those other 29 teams. But in this case, I mean, and the real like sort of gut punch, I actually like Frank Reich as a coach. I think he would have been one of maybe the better situational coaches, and maybe would have had some creative ways to use more. It might have finally been a good situation in Carolina, is what I'm getting at.
Exactly. I mean, you think about how Michael Pittman's ADP has just cratered because last season wasn't particularly efficient, and the quarterback situation with Indianapolis seems like it'll be as bad or worse. And yet, through that last season, I mean, the Colts scheme touches to him. Better at it than the Panthers have been with DJ Moore. And so that part of it is a little disappointing there. The flip side of it is that I mean, if everything comes to fruition, this potentially takes Justin Fields. And I wrote an article recently talking about how there are actually some pretty serious risks for Fields, and that a lot of the early quarterbacks do actually look pretty overvalued when you look at all of their range of outcomes, not just the top one. But in a perfect world, and if the Bears plan does work, then now we're looking at Justin Fields as a potential superstar, because it's just really hard to overstate how bad his receiving weapons have been.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a much better deal for him than for Moore, I guess, like on its face. Because I mean, I believe in DJ Moore's ability. I think he's going to be able to earn volume, all of those things. But I'm a big fan of targets per route run. It's tough to earn a really high targets per route run rate when a lot of the routes you run don't even end in a team pass attempt, right? Like, I mean, he might get open at a much higher rate than the Bears receivers last year. And really the receiver, Darnell Mooney, their main receiver, and then the one they go and acquire, Chase Claypool, are both more higher ADOT guys. And so maybe they're not as good of a fit because, again, with the bad offensive line, part of the reason Fields is scrambling so much, taking sacks and stuff, is he doesn't have enough time to let his top receivers develop those longer, deeper routes. Maybe DJ Moore's winning quicker. He's good at running slants. He's good at around the line of scrimmage. Maybe there is more, there's a lot of ways that this can be an improvement on what we saw from Chicago last year, but it just seems like it's so much better to be thinking about it in terms of improvement for Justin Fields. But I agree with you. I mean, the early ADP, the quarterbacks are pricey. And Fields in particular is one that stands out, that you need a lot of improvement on the passing. It's already sort of baked in that what DJ Moore could offer him. And so it's still exciting. It'll be fun, but it'll be interesting to see how those prices evolve. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the AFC side today. The Bears are a really fun team. Certainly with the amount of money they've had and the moves they've made, and they really sort of tanked last year. Shawn, last year in like February, we talked about some of the teams that we thought were, looking at Super Bowl odds. Shawn, one of the fun ways we can look at this right now in terms of what teams maybe have won the offseason, have improved, where teams are, is what the current market is for win total over-unders, which, I mean, it's really interesting to look at some of the divisions where there has been significant movement. Again, I'm going back to the NFC and dipping in there, but the one that is popping up for me, as we talked about the Bears, that's a division that, I mean, the Lions have been favored to win pretty much all offseason. The Vikings were really good last year in win-loss record, won the division, but were everyone's favorite team to sort of pick on as being worse than their record. They get upset in the first round of the playoffs. They've had an offseason where they've lost more talent probably than they've been able to bring in. And they're trying to sort of stay competitive. Packers obviously probably going to move on from Aaron Rodgers. Those are the two teams that have dominated this division for a decade plus. And now you have the Lions having really improved late last year, looking like the team on the up and up. And the Bears, another team making that type of move. And it's a division in flux. There are other divisions similar to that. You have on the AFC side, you have the AFC South. Jaguars obviously make the run late in the season, kind of take that crown from the Titans and Colts, have sort of been the top two teams. The Titans, just the year prior to last, were the number one seed in the AFC. They now have a win over under of 7.5, and that's being bet hard to the under. The juice is on the under there. Jacksonville's at 10.5, easily leading that division. This time last year, you had the Chargers sort of up with the Chiefs, and the Chiefs sort of being knocked down a little bit because they had an expected difficult schedule. This year, you have the Chiefs, the clear favorites in the AFC West at 11.5 win total. Last year, it was 10.5. And then you have the Chargers all the way down at 9.5 as the second team, 2 full wins behind the Chiefs. The AFC East might be the most interesting division in, the AFC, or maybe in football. You have the Bills at 10.5, but you also have the Jets and the Dolphins at 9.5, two teams making big runs, and the Patriots lagging at 7.5 with their win total. And then in the North, the really interesting storyline is every team has at least an 8.5 win total over under, meaning every team is projected to be at least 500. Both Baltimore and Pittsburgh are at 8.5. You have Cincinnati leading the division at 11.5, Cleveland at 9.5. All those numbers are, you can bet over or under on the team's wins for the 2023 season. But it looks like a couple of divisions are going to be divisions of strength, and this is really the conference of strength. And then certainly the AFC South is sort of the lagging one. We're starting on this side because it's an interesting conference. We have the same favorites sort of as last year, Kansas City, Buffalo. Buffalo's got the tougher division now, right? So the Bengals actually have a higher win total over under than Buffalo. Buffalo's just getting bet. The over is being bet pretty heavily so far. Did you think there's been any major movement in the top of the AFC through the free agency period?
No, not necessarily. I mean, obviously the big elephant in the room is always going to be that Aaron Rodgers situation and what it does to the AFC East. My initial thought looking at this, well, the one that really jumps out to me is the strangest, and I'll ask if you can explain that one to me. But Cleveland at 9.5 and in second place in the AFC North seems bizarre. But other than that, when we look at the AFC East, and that's becoming, I think, in many ways, the most interesting division and the most competitive division in football. You have the Buffalo Bills, who even with the flame out in the playoffs this past year, and with the very difficult situation with overtime against Kansas City the previous year, that could easily be the best team in football. And so you look at that, and then you look at the teams coming at them. To see the Patriots in last, despite their offensive problems, and knowing that they are looking to actually address them appropriately this year. I mean, that's not a team devoid of talent in any way, shape, or form. Maybe the interesting part are the rumors that they really don't want Mac Jones, because if they did, and this is something where, you kind of wonder if Bill Belichick, if he were able to swallow his pride. And obviously that was something that potentially caused some issues with Tom Brady. Obviously Tom Brady causes some of his own issues. And even though Brady was the one who came out ahead on that, I don't think that we can purely put it on Belichick. But for me, Mac Jones is a potential breakout player for the 2023 season, especially with a real offensive coaching staff. And, even things like Mike Gesicki getting there and them talking about using him basically as a big receiver. I think that there is potential excitement around that. If they start over at QB, then they're going to be the worst team in that division, because this division is just so good. The Miami Dolphins, if Tua is healthy, they're a potential Super Bowl contender. The Jets are interesting because even though I say that this is such a good division and you've got to worry about all of these teams, I do feel like there are echoes to last year where the Chiefs seem like the easiest over bet in all of NFL betting, because the enthusiasm about what the Raiders had done with Russell Wilson and the Broncos, and then the Chargers with Justin Herbert coming off that season where they've been a little bit snake bitten and you think they're going to take the next step. And that makes it just too tough for the Chiefs to overcome. Our take, and it was right, but just because you're right in the one instance doesn't necessarily mean that the thought process was correct. But our thought process was that Patrick Mahomes is simply too good. The Chiefs are going to be fine. When you look at how these games work their way out, they're going to still come up on top. Now, that's what people are betting on Buffalo, and yet I guess I still wouldn't be surprised to see them do it easily and have the gap be a little bit larger. I think it's a bigger issue for them and a bigger issue for the Bengals when you're trying to look at who's going to be the number one seed, and just how big a role that can play when we're looking at these three AFC juggernauts.
Yeah, and some of the notes that you have thrown out, the market has certainly responded to. The market, I think, a little sharper this year, Sean. Last year when we were talking about this, we had a lot of we had a few bets that we really liked immediately, and the Chiefs over being one of them. The Browns you mentioned at 9.5 has already been bet really heavily to the under. The Bills at 10.5 has already been bet really heavily to the over. The Chiefs is actually pretty flat at 11.5, but they have a really tough schedule again. They have lost some talent, or not maybe. They went 14-3 last year. They've won at least 12 games every season that Patrick Mahomes has played, even the season where he lost some time. I mean, when he misses time, they still are decent because Andy Reid's a good coach and they have they have a good system. I don't know.
The swapping out Orlando Brown for a different tackle and having Brown go to the Bengals is definitely suboptimal. But I also don't think they would have done that if they weren't pretty confident in that working big picture, even if it hurts them a little bit. And then you lose Juju Smith-Schuster, who can't get open. I just mentioned that I liked some of the things that the Patriots were doing, but I mean, Ben, replacing Jacoby Myers for Juju Smith-Schuster is a massive loss, right? And what are they doing
there? Yeah. I mean, that was a confusing one, and it looks like the Patriots will have probably the hardest schedule this year. I mean, a couple different sources I'm looking at right now have them as the hardest, one of the hardest at least. I mean, they had the really tough division, and then they still have tough divisional matchups as well. So you have that explains somewhat of their lower over under and where they're at. But yeah, I mean, looking at the AFC North, I want to comment on that. I mean, if you go look at like the division winner odds, the Bengals clear favorites. The Ravens, even though their over under is a full game below the Browns, are even with the Browns in division winner odds because they're being bet to the over on their win total over under. The Browns being bet to the under. I think the AFC East is a really interesting one. The Dolphins are being bet more to the under on their over under at 9.5. I mean, that's a team that had a good year, despite all the Tua concussion stuff. And I think that's probably the market kind of responding to that and saying we don't really trust their quarterback to play a full season. And I get that. It's probably very fair. But you have to look at probably this past season as one of the tougher outcomes for them in terms of how things actually went. Yeah, it's interesting. The market likes the Jets more right now. They obviously haven't made the trade, but are highly expected to make that trade. The Dolphins are expected to have a little bit of a tougher schedule than the Jets. They finished second in the division. They're going to have to face all the other, second place teams across the AFC. But I mean, I think you got to have a little bit of optimism for what Mike McDaniel did in year one. And if Tua actually does stay healthy, I mean, 9.5 is a high number for them. It does feel like it's a tough number. They have to go 10-7 or better. But they went 9-8 last year, made the playoffs despite not having their quarterback for a lot of that.
And you look at it, I think that the coaching staff there is a huge plus. We did several shows midseason about how defenses were adjusting to the play calling and the types of routes that they were getting Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle open on. And yet, even with that being the case, I expect the Dolphins to be very dynamic offensively again this year. The issues, I think, would come in with where do they make a real jump other than just being healthy, which in and of itself could be enough. But they're 25th in free agent spending. Now, some of the spending was very intelligent in that they go ahead and re-sign that duo of running backs, which is just so interesting to fantasy managers, both as zero RB options and Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. Even though they're both perfect fits for that scheme and a re-sign for that reason, they do offer some subtleties in terms of Mostert being the sprint speed guy, Wilson bringing you some more tackle breaking. So they're good complements to each other there. But when you're not able to spend a lot of money and you don't have your first round pick, you only have 4 picks total. It really is going to have to be that in the second season with this group that they take a leap. And sometimes we tend to forget about that possibility when the immediate results were so good. But if you're a Dolphins fan, I think that's where the challenge to the Bills come from, is that you have this second year together. You have a tandem of wide receivers that's even better than what they have there in Cincinnati. If Tua is healthy, I mean, this team is gonna be in it. I think that the reason that you would go under on this is simply that one very straightforward thing would break it all,
which is Tua being hurt, or is that what you mean?
Yes.
But I thought you might also go with that is just the strength of the division as well. I mean, somebody in this division is going to go under, basically. You know, one of these top 3 teams at these win totals is going to go under, or maybe not. But if Aaron Rodgers is with the Jets, I guess I just think the market having so much more faith in Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, and less faith in the Dolphins at the same win total over under is an interesting comparison. I don't think that means I want to go out and hammer Miami's over, but you just talked through that, and you mentioned the Bengals receivers. It feels a lot like if there's a team like the Bengals from last year where their success in sort of year one, you can see the shape of what they're going to be able to do now going forward is being sort of undervalued by the market. I would probably say it's the Dolphins. I think you have to be excited about what Mike McDaniel did. You have to look at the context of their 2022 season and acknowledge, look, Tua missed a lot of time. They were doing a lot of things to sort of protect him late, and then they ended up playing in the playoffs without him. And yet they were able to find so much success so easily at times that it's not that I don't think teams can figure that out. It's that they now have a foundation that I want to see what Mike McDaniel comes up with next. Like I have faith that he's going to be able to have the next answer for the next puzzle, for the next problem. That looked very strong in terms of their foundation of their year one building into year 2. Like you said, I don't think they're, ready to compete with the Bills for this division and be, this super team, but that is within the range of their outcomes. And so there's this element of, fatigue almost, where their season falls apart a little. They don't stay as healthy as you want, and people are not as excited. And this probably plays into fantasy football, where you can probably get, there's not as much enthusiasm for the Dolphins as there maybe should be. You probably get Tua at least cheaper than you maybe should, because people don't want to deal with the concussions. I mean, he looked like the late round QB smash for periods last year. Even after missing a few games with the concussion early, he comes back and then obviously gets another concussion and potentially two weeks in a row. They had him play on the short week, and then he gets another one on Thursday Night Football. A lot of scary stuff there. I mean, we're not writing that off, but there's certainly a fatigue with the Dolphins being really exciting early, and then some fear, and then obviously about the Tua situation, very rational fear, but then maybe missing that what happened in 2022 means that step forward in year 2 is more likely than people are giving credit for, the market is giving credit for. And on the flip side, the Jets maybe were assuming too much immediately, right? Because it's the new shiny thing. Plug Aaron Rodgers in there. I mean, I love Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to be the next Devonta Adams if he gets Aaron Rodgers. But like Aaron Rodgers is also pretty old, and it might not work out that way, right? And they've now traded away Elijah Moore, brought in Allen Lazard, Breece Hall recovering from an ACL. We don't know how healthy he'll be immediately in week 1 in the early part of the season.
Who's their offensive coordinator, Ben?
I believe it's Nathaniel Hackett. And that was not a very strong thing last season in Denver. You mentioned Mike McDaniel being a huge plus on Miami's side. Maybe not a huge plus for the Jets there. And all this stuff we know about Aaron Rodgers having communication issues, I'll just come out and say, the young guys not ever really being on the same page, him holding them to really demanding standards, whatever it is, the stuff about the meeting rooms and everything, and then he says it's overblown. That was the big storyline this past year. The reality is, young guys have needed time to gel with Aaron Rodgers over the years of his career. He's never changed teams. He's always been in the same situation and still not been able to communicate with his teammates in a way that's elevated other players quickly. Typically, is the way that I would put it. And so him going to a new team, there should be some, concerns there as well. And especially when you mentioned that Hackett's kind of the guy that's supposed to oversee this. We just saw, obviously, the Russell Wilson new team situation. I mean, there's reasons that parallel could be completely unfair of a comparison to be making. But yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's like, oh yeah, we're going to drop Aaron Rodgers in there. They got Breece Hall, they got Garrett Wilson. This is going to be amazing. The Jets are going to be awesome. Their defense is great, and they do have a good young defense. And then we're not willing to be positive about the Dolphins in similar ways, where they've actually probably shown the ability to gel offensively. They also have a fun defense. Yeah, I don't know. That's a weird thing in the market. When I look at these, that sticks out to me, that in that division.
Well, I don't think it's unfair to mention Russell Wilson, because so much of what we're anchoring to is that first season with Tom Brady with the Buccaneers, and assuming that Aaron Rodgers will do the same thing, and he might, but the potential issues that you mentioned are issues really either way. But then thinking about the fact that, I mean, some of the issues last season that he had with the young receivers were simply him trying to deflect his own apparently diminishing skills. Now, if he's back in a great environment where he's excited about the coaching staff, he likes the talent around him, maybe that completely turns back around. But you can't ignore some of the red flags that were there for Russell Wilson that then actually turned out to be the key thing when he went to the Broncos, and think that we don't have a wider range of outcomes than maybe we want to give to someone who has won a couple of recent MVPs. So from that perspective, I think there's an issue. There's also just the issue of actually getting a little bit less talented, because when you bring in a Lazard and you get rid of Elijah Moore, now maybe Elijah Moore is a bust, and maybe that first season was a fluke, but in the research I was doing recently over at Sports Info Solutions on our college side, and it'll be a big part of what you and I discuss as we kind of go through the pods the next couple of weeks. Obviously, a lot of cool stuff on RotoViz itself, but it blew me away again just how good Moore was from a yards per route perspective in his final year in college. And then we made a series of trades with our dynasty team recently. We picked up George Pickens from moving down a little bit in the rookie draft. On a separate trade, we moved Elijah Moore, in part because we had to get down the total number of pieces. And you're thinking there, obviously Pickens was the guy last season. He looks like the breakout player. But one of the things that we mentioned to each other as we're discussing it is that, I mean, Moore's rookie season was actually better in terms of a lot of different peripherals than Pickens was. And so we know that Moore is coming off of a train wreck, a situation probably where he had burned his bridges with the Jets to the point where they had to move him. But I mean, this is a loss as you're trying to build the team around Aaron Rodgers. You're actively getting older and less talented. And I think that's the sad part of the frustrating part for the Jets. It's a little bit of that red flag when you think in terms of, like, what are the downsides and what are the risks? Right now, the Jets have a lot of draft capital that they could use as well to improve the team. But after the Rodgers trade, that probably will no longer be the case, to where you're more or less then looking at the team that you have now with Rodgers as your group. And so, I mean, I'm excited for it. I think that anytime that you get a young receiver like Wilson and you actually can unlock him with good quarterback play, we're looking for good quarterback play all across the league. We hope that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud come in and are immediate stars. That'll make fantasy football better. It will make the Sunday viewing situation, much more fun. And yet we do have to consider some of the risks.
Yeah. I mean, everything you're saying, I can't agree with more. And we got to get into the dynasty trades on another show when we get an opportunity. But yeah, Shawn, we had a lot of players. We've talked about it on the show, the way that we were managing our dynasty roster, having a lot of depth. And then we had to cut down our roster at the end of March, right? And so we had to make some deals, or had a flurry of deals, had a lot of conversations about the ways that we valued players. But as you were sort of alluding to, we weren't thrilled about just kind of giving up on Elijah Moore, but we did to sort of as a part of the constraints of some of the moves that we were making. And yet, all those risks, as you mentioned, with the Jets aside, there's also reason for optimism. There's a reason there's so much optimism. We're just kind of talking about it from a market perspective, but I mean, Garrett Wilson is probably that dude, and you get Aaron Rodgers in there, and Aaron Rodgers' ability to be accurate, and if they can just gel at any point during the season, I think Garrett Wilson's going to end up looking fantastic down the stretch this year, at least. I mean, he might be somebody who takes a little bit of time to build during the season this year, just as a young player and as one who will need to get used to a new quarterback. And we just talked about some of the stuff that Rodgers has not always gelled quickly with his young guys. It might be a thing where Rodgers is sort of forcing throws to Allen Lazard a couple times, too many in the first month or so. But you got to think by like October and especially by November that it's just going to be, he's going to understand that he's got to go to Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson wins on every route. So that,
or just right off the bat, Wilson is battling Justin Jefferson to get to 2,000 yards.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, that's where we're at. We've had a couple of month layoff. We got to come out with some fire. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to be excited about with the Jets as well. But yeah, I didn't throw this in there because I was trying to place in my mind. I was sort of talking about the Dolphins and reasons for optimism there. Their defensive moves, but they also traded for Jalen Ramsey this year. They traded for Bradley Chubb in season last year. That's just something else I wanted to throw out with the Dolphins that we didn't mention here. That like the Dolphins, there's reason to be legitimately very excited about the Dolphins. They now have two really strong corners with Xavier Howard alongside Jalen Ramsey, and they added Bradley Chubb. They got a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball as well. If Tua stays healthy enough, and Sean, our boy Mike White is in Miami now too. So if something were to happen, I think they've improved probably on their backup situation, or at least on the fact that Teddy Bridgewater was unable to stay healthy. I mean, they did have an upper echelon backup last year, but he was unable to stay healthy in his own right, and they had to go to Skylar Thompson. Mike White's the kind of guy we were excited for with the Jets last year, that we wanted them to keep playing him and not go back to Zach Wilson later in the year. He's the kind of guy that you like to have, I think, as a backup. Can hopefully run the offense, can hopefully distribute to talent. And there's obviously a lot of talent in that passing game. Such an interesting division. We could do a whole show on that. Sean, what do you think about, I kind of feel like the AFC West, we spent a lot of time talking about last offseason, is sort of one of the least interesting teams. The Raiders don't look headed the right direction. They lose Derek Carr. They lose Darren Waller. They lose a lot of talent this offseason. We'll see sort of how the rest of their offseason comes together. They've added Jimmy Garoppolo. They've added Jacoby Myers. And that was kind of confusing to me because they have Hunter Renfrow, who had a really injury-plagued year last year, but now you have sort of two slot types at the same time.
You get younger and you get healthier when you swap out Myers for Waller. But, do you get the answer to your needs exactly as you're alluding to?
Yeah, and I don't know that you do, especially when you're probably going down in quarterback. Garoppolo obviously has played at a high level and has played in conference championships, and did he play in the Super Bowl? He played in the Super Bowl too. But is a guy that we've all sort of kind of always wondered if it was Kyle Shanahan's scheme sort of elevating him. And when you see Brock Purdy come in last year and play as well as he did after Garoppolo goes down, you get even more of that feel. Can he go and play in a Josh McDaniels system? Obviously, a system that he's familiar with because they were together in New England when he was backing up Tom Brady for a couple of years. It'll be very interesting to see how the Raiders go. But the Broncos, we talked about how early on in the offseason, how the Broncos are going to have to make a decision on Russell Wilson basically at the end of this season, because the 2025 season gets guaranteed at the beginning of 2024. So if they don't have him in mind as their long-term quarterback after this coming year, they're going to want to cut him before the next season, 2024, to prevent having 2025 guaranteed as well and being in for 3 more years from this point where we're at now. Which means that 2024 is kind of like sort of a tank year. You're taking on a lot of dead money, but you're also trying to get younger. that was all, contingent on their head coach decision and what they did in the offseason. I think everything has pointed to that being the plan in my mind. They hire Sean Payton. He's basically said, we're not going to have Russell Wilson's, health guys in the building or whatever it was. I'm not going to let him do whatever he wants around here. And so, I mean, I feel like Denver's a good bet for an under on their win total. They're at 8.5. They have even money on either side. I think Peyton's going to be comfortable sort of evaluating this year. I don't think he wants to be tethered to Wilson for sure. And if Wilson doesn't make drastic improvements, they're probably going to be cutting him after the year and looking at this as a multi-year sort of rebuild to be ready in 2025 when they get most of his money off the books. That's the big advantage of if they do cut him after this year. So anyway, the Raiders, Broncos, not really super interesting anymore in my mind. I don't know how you feel about that. And then you have, the Chargers are potentially finally interesting. I mean, hopefully, adding Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator addresses some of the low ADOT issues that Justin Herbert was running into last year, but they haven't really addressed the pass catching depth. We love to talk on the show, Sean, about these good offenses are understanding you need a lot of weaponry, and Chargers still kind of just going at it this year, even after last year where Keenan Allen, Mike Williams missed some time, and they show that they don't have a depth of weapons. They're still kind of going at it with a lack of depth there. Hopefully they address that in the draft in a major way. And then the Chiefs, sort of the top team in that division. I don't know why I spent so much time talking about that division, because what I was trying to say was they're not that interesting of a division. But what are your thoughts on the AFC West?
Yeah, I mean, I could see the Chargers actually being the team that's a little bit more in disarray. Now, Kellen Moore actually could be the answer as opposed to continuing the question. And yet, anytime that your answer includes giving Austin Eckler the permission to seek a trade, then I think you've got some initial risk. I mean, really, you want those underneath passes to go to him, and you want to free up those receivers to get down the field. One of the things, Mike Williams, to me, he's someone I was excited about the last couple of years. I think that last year was pretty disastrous for him in terms of what the future now holds. And he looks like one of the most overdrafted players in early best ball tournaments. So I would throw that out there. I think that Keenan Allen, there was some talk about him being cut, but basically they said, no, we're going to do what we need to contractually to address the salary cap in different ways, bring him back. I mean, he's our guy. And even when we have Keenan Allen, we more or less need to use a first round pick at receiver to get up to the firepower. So if that first round pick hits and comes in, then I think this could be a dynamic and exciting team. And maybe they actually do threaten the Chiefs. But some of the stuff and some of the scapegoating of the offensive coordinator, even though I agree that he was an issue, I think sort of uncovered some of the things that Brandon Staley is maybe also struggling with. And that where a year and a half ago, there might have been the sense that this is one of the better coached teams in football. I guess I would not really put them in that category now. I think there's a lot of work that this team has to do organizationally to prove that. And so even with Justin Herbert being there, I think there are some risks. It'll be interesting to see, how the different teams can add. You mentioned the Broncos and not really probably attacking for the season. They don't have the picks because of the Russell Wilson trade. They were, in terms of total dollars spent, now some of this is over multi-year contracts, but they're actually number 2 in the entire NFL in free agent spending. That would be pre the new extension for Jalen Hurts. But that was done to try and really bolster the offensive line. Maybe give Russell Wilson the time to make some of those throws. They've really looked to move their receivers. They don't seem that happy with their receivers, even though they have depth. That'll be a team to kind of track during the draft itself to see if they're able to move these guys. I think that part will be interesting because it will again give you some sign of what they're really trying for in 2023. I almost think that Peyton has come in and wants to kind of do a little bit the thing that we talk about in fantasy, which is to create as many pathways as you can. And they have the path where they're bad, but also the path where maybe Wilson does actually turn things around. And they want to keep that open to the extent that they bring in a Samaje Perine. He becomes a very interesting fantasy play. we like him just purely as a talent. And then, I mean, the timeline is still very fuzzy, and we know what happened last year with J.K. Dobbins, but healthy Javonte Williams is one of the 5 best running backs in the NFL. So they have some things they can do from a personnel perspective on offense if everything comes together. We know they've got a good defense. I mean, Sean Payton, I agree with what you're saying. At the same time, if they have a shot to win, I mean, he's going to be one of those guys who goes after. I mean, one of the things that they did with the Saints was really never look at the long term. They kept trying to pull everything into the present.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I lied. This is an interesting division because those are all really good points. On the Chargers, I mean, I'm right there with you. If you get rid of Eckler, it can't really be overstated how much he adds to their passing game as a third receiving weapon. Because as you said, I mean, if they were to deal him, and if you have legit concerns about Mike Williams, which I thought was a really interesting note, this team does nothing in the passing game. Joshua Palmer, in a year where Keenan Allen and Mike Williams missed considerable time, did nothing to step up. I mean, you say Mike Williams is one of the most overdrafted players. I see a lot of people still liking Palmer as the number 3 receiver in a good passing game. He's tied to a good quarterback. I can't see any upside there. There wasn't really any production in his profile coming out, and he's done nothing to this point. Other than, I mean, in best ball, you can talk yourself into, okay, he might have some long touchdowns or some splashy moments, and it is, the whole idea of being tied to Justin Herbert and maybe running a lot of routes is great. But for a guy who ran over 600 routes last year and had basically no target competition to only draw targets on 16% of his routes, and to have a really low, even like weighted targets per out run when you look at his air yards added in. I mean, Gerald Everett ended up with a higher weighted targets per out run, which is the little stat I have that I add in the air yards. And he's a tight end in the same offense, same situation, was earning more volume. And like when you wait even for the air yard, I mean, Palmer should have been doing more to win down the field and wasn't doing it. So if Williams is a concern, if they lose Eckler, if any of that is a concern, that's a massive problem for the Chargers. It's also probably an argument that, and we talked about this a little bit early in the offseason, that we might be in on some of the older receivers this year in some cases, but Keenan Allen had been sort of declining in his targets per out run and his yards per target and his efficiency. It looked a little better last year, but he misses time. And so now the market's out on him because he misses games, but he looked from a per route run perspective like he's not dead. He actually got his yards per out run back over 2.0 for the first time since 2019. Showed that he might still have a little bit of juice. And again, if everything else in this passing game isn't that strong, there's some possibility that Keenan Allen in a healthy year could be, a throwback season for him a little bit. And another guy I've talked about is DeAndre Hopkins. Some of these guys that are really good players can age a little bit better. He's one that I'll be a little bit interested in. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I share some of your concerns there. Your thoughts on the Broncos? I mean, it'll be interesting to see. You mentioned the offensive line might be to help Russ. I also think it's interesting that they were 4-year deals, and they could be, hey, we're building from the inside out. They also had Zach Allen on the D line, and we're thinking multiple years down the road. We want to get the offensive line and defensive line in place right now. I mean, like you said, they could be thinking through multiple pathways, but all of the smoke about trading both Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy to me was something I think I tweeted about it in the early part of the offseason, where I thought, I think you need to get rid of those guys, because even if you hit on Russ and he does work out this year, you can still try to readdress the receiver position, but you need to be planning for the reality that you're going to have sort of a rebuild. The next time that you're actually competitive, those guys would be owed massive extensions, right? And so right now, trading them for more draft capital to sort of reset the rookie pay clock, if you will, and try to hit on other receivers, I think makes some sense, as opposed to hanging on to them, trying to re-sign them to massive extensions. We've seen the wide receiver market obviously be a lot stronger over the years. Because if you do hit on Wilson, can you really pay Wilson and pay receivers and put that much money into the passing game? I think that's tough. Now, if you were already in place with it like a rookie quarterback, I can understand paying for the receivers. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see where they go. But I think that the potential trades of those receivers signifies a look into the next couple of years that we probably can't sign them to extensions when they hit free agency. at the prices they're going to command. But if we can get draft capital now, send them to a team that is ready to compete on their current contracts, that might be, a move to make. What do you think about the Jaguars being so clearly the favorite in the AFC South? I mean, I think they looked fantastic. Trevor Lawrence looked like he's headed the right direction. Doug Peterson looked like a strong part of what they're going to be able to do and improving the situation as opposed to the year prior where Urban Meyer was really sort of making everything more difficult for all the players. They add Calvin Ridley now, so they have Ridley, they have Christian Kirk, Zay Jones. It's an interesting. Evan Ingram's back. It's an interesting passing game, certainly. Travis Etienne's back. I think you have to be excited about Jacksonville. I guess I'm not convinced the Titans are definitely going to be bad. Mike Vrabel has typically gotten the most out of his teams. The Colts are being bet pretty heavily to the over on their really low win total of 6.5. Some hope that they can rebound a little bit under a new coach. Texans have a 5.5 win total and are being bet fairly evenly to the over and under there. So not a lot of faith in them, even if they get a rookie quarterback at number 2 being good immediately. And obviously they've traded away Brandon Cooks now and are not the same in terms of what they can offer from a skill position to help that rookie quarterback. Is Jacksonville just going to run away with this? If you look at the division odds, they're minus 150 to win the division right now. I mean, there's basically that's the biggest favorite in the NFL. Is there anyone else that we should be looking at here?
Well, I think that the team maybe to look at, and it's almost certainly a year early, but the Texans actually appear to be wanting to take a step and to maybe have the things in place now to do a little bit of that. The Titans and Colts were not aggressive in free agency. They really don't add anything from a fantasy perspective that we would be looking at. You mentioned Mike Vrabel, and I can't imagine him not fielding a competitive team. And yet at the same time, the front office really seems like they want to take this team in a different direction. And so it's difficult for the head coach, if people are working across purposes or just have a different vision. I mean, for him to stick there, and maybe he won't even want to, because you would imagine he would be extremely highly in demand if they parted ways at the end of the season or something like that. But I mean, he's got to fit into the new direction as well. And even though that, we like Treylon Burks, that what they have in the passing game is, I mean, it's apocalyptically bad, really. It's one of the reasons why Chigakonkwo is being kind of bid up to his prices in best ball, because it seems like the targets have to go somewhere. And he did some interesting things at the end of last season. You look at the Colts, they're not going to have a quarterback. And I mean, they seem multiple years away. The Texans, because you're going to hit on one of those two, I don't know that they're ultra elite prospects, but two guys who appear very clean from a passing perspective, appear very clean from a leadership perspective. I almost think that, if it ends up being Bryce Young, you'd be even a little bit more excited for it. But they go and do some subtle things like adding Dalton Schultz, adding Devin Singletary. I mean, Robert Woods probably more just creates congestion in your wide receiver group than anything else. But even after they make that pick, they have an additional first-round pick. They have a couple of third-round picks. They have 12 picks total. And even though we've criticized what they did in this sort of, permanent rebuilding, just shuffling the chairs kind of time period before finally now appearing to go in the right direction this offseason, maybe a few of those past moves will pay off a little bit. And if nothing else, we watched the players who were on that team last year compete and lose themselves the number 1 pick in the last week of the season, some things like that. I'm ready to go from, I joke on the shows and in the articles that I watch as many games as I possibly can every Sunday. And then there'll be 4 or 5 games that I have to watch in the shortcuts. Now, sometimes only 2 or 3, because I'd be like watching a lot of games on Sunday. And then there'll be the Texans game that I more or less just look at the opposing box score to see what happened. And I don't know how that game. I'm looking forward to watching some Texans games this year.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah, that is. I want to make a case for the Titans, but they're not gonna be very good. The last division, Sean, we didn't really touch on a ton, is the AFC North, but you mentioned the Brown. I mean, who knows what happens with Deshaun Watson, but he was not good last year. He was worse than Jacoby Brissett for their team, for their offense. Maybe he just needed that, get his feet wet in the first year. We talked about that a little bit in the last offseason. Kind of take the heat off of a potential, if he would have had a whole year suspension, potential whole offseason of, will he play, what's going to happen, etc. Just a lot of like sort of PR stuff, and it's all, kind of gross, honestly. But now that he's actually played some games, maybe they can focus this offseason more on football as sort of the thought. I don't know. I'm not super optimistic about what we'll see out of Cleveland, but there seems to be a little bit of faith there. The Ravens, obviously, a lot of uncertainty. I think we know what we're getting from the Bengals. They should be the favorite. Ravens, ton of uncertainty right now, but are being bet to the over of their 8.5 win total. And I think that makes sense because the most likely scenario has to be Lamar's back and is playing. He might just not play, but doesn't really seem like he's going anywhere else. And if he's playing, I'm taking them over 8.5 probably. I'm taking them over the Browns probably. They still have a lot of talent on that roster, the Ravens. The Steelers is a really interesting team. You mentioned to me in the early part of the offseason, and I've kind of put this in the back of my mind, that you really liked them and their passing game as one to be in on. George Pickens, Deontay Johnson is now really cheap. Pat Freiermuth is a tight end that we really like. We saw enough, I think, or did we see enough from Kenny Pickett? I mean, he statistically was not great. And I think the market isn't going to love the Steelers no matter how much we talk them up, probably, because I think there's a lot of belief that Kenny Pickett can't be good enough to elevate his players. I'm with you, and we talked about it a lot on the show during the season, that he can, that he is, that his numbers were not entirely indicative of what he was as a player last year, and that he is at least not a huge net negative for his receiving weapons, that he should be able to develop a little bit more. Also, I mean, you don't expect rookies to be perfect in year one. Are you still looking at that trio of Steeler pass catchers and that Steelers passing game as one that's maybe undervalued right now?
I am. And you look at the different types of roles that those players can function in. You have Pat Freiermuth obviously catching some passes over the middle. You have the possession threat with him, but also the potential red zone threat. We know that Deontay Johnson is probably the best receiver, or among the best 3 or 4 receivers in the NFL at getting open off of the line of scrimmage, to be open within the first couple of seconds that the quarterback needs to work through his progressions. You have Pickens, who, granted, in the big picture last year, his peripherals were not as strong as you would think based on watching him play. He did go through stretches where he didn't actually draw targets very well. And so then you're kind of thinking to the highlight plays and hoping that those highlight plays tend to work their way back down into him actually being able to draw targets. I would say that, that's probably a little bit the concern, even stretching back to college and thinking about why, he was a second round pick available where he was, as opposed to going with some of those elite guys. Now, we know the other big thing was the injury. And so for me, that's probably most of the explanation. When you think about the playmaking ability that those 3 guys bring, and that they would appear, at least superficially, to complement each other well. And then even though we've been critical of Najee Harris and his sort of game-breaking ability as a runner, he's someone who tends to leave yards on the field as a running back, which isn't what you want when you spend what they spent on him. To spend at that level, the guy needs to be a star. He frequently doesn't look as good as the guys who back him up. And yet, someone who does bring some athleticism and at least some receiving comfort, if not explosion. So they've got the things around Kenny Pickett that really will now make it about him. And he's got this great opportunity in year 2 The thing I would say, just big picture about the Steelers and the Ravens, is that these organizations are so strong. Even last year with the quarterback play and some of the problems the Steelers had, they're fighting for that playoff spot and that 500 finish. The Ravens, even without Lamar Jackson, are fighting for those things. The Cleveland Browns, with some interesting quarterback play, you have Nick Chubb, you have the offensive line, but the Browns really need a lot to be organizationally where the Ravens and the Steelers are. Now, they spent some money in free agency, but they don't have first and second round picks, a similar issue to what the Denver Broncos are dealing with, that they made their bet on Deshaun Watson and it's all in on him. And so it's not even so much the case with Watson that maybe he can bounce back to being decent, and that the team itself then. I mean, one of the things with the Broncos is, with the Browns, is people feel like they were actually pretty decent without him. And if he is a star, then they'll be fantastic. But in addition to actual quality of play, it really raised some pretty serious questions about style of play and how well that was going to fit with what the actual strengths of the Browns are. I mean, the Browns, even after getting Elijah Moore, are much weaker at the receiving positions than the Steelers are, obviously, than the Bengals are. The Ravens have made some interesting moves where I think basically you still have to hope that Rashad Bateman is awesome. But I guess it just is shocking to me to think that, even though I'm a big fan of Kevin Stefanski as a head coach, I think that he's done a lot of things well there. And Jacoby Brissett, if he ends up doing what Pat thinks is going to happen and is the starter there with the Commanders, I mean, he'll really owe so much of his career to Stefanski. These things don't even really seem similar to me, in that, I mean, the Browns would appear to need a real ceiling outcome to get to their levels, where to miss at least being in the range of their projection, you would need some pretty seriously catastrophic things to happen to the Ravens or the Steelers.
Yeah, I like that point about the Steelers and Ravens just organizationally. I mean, that's the way I think about it as well. It's not like the only thing that matters, certainly, and that's not the point you're making, but there is something to be said about stability and about the ways that they've done things over a lot of years, and they tend to be better than they should be, basically. I mean, we talk about the Steelers and what can Pickett do or not do. People are really focused on him as a player. When you think about it from a situational perspective, they made the playoffs when Ben Roethlisberger was done. I mean, not really even able to throw the ball down the field. They were a playoff team, a couple of years back. Had that, wild shootout game with the Browns in the wild card weekend. But I mean, they've never really been bad, right? I mean, this past year things were not great. They had a rookie quarterback, but Mike Tomlin's a good coach. This is a team that tends to be able to, do things effectively on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah, I mean, what they were able to accomplish in making the playoffs just in the last couple of years and then they missed last year, but they're a 9-8 team that's in playoff contention. This is a team that, again, it's not a certainty that they're going to be great forever. The Ravens sort of looked dysfunctional last year as well, but same sort of idea where the systems that are in place, the way that you go through I don't think we think about this enough, but the way that you go through your offseason program, the way that a head coach delegates to his positional coaches and what he has there in terms of trust and everything. There's so much turnover in NFL coaching staffs and the way that things go, to build out the roots in the organization to where the head coach can delegate and feel confident in that his players and his position groups are going to be taught the right things, and he doesn't have to worry about that. And then he can focus on other things and incorporating other elements of, ideas they've had for improvement, what have you. The Ravens, what's popping into my head is the way that they've incorporated analytics in a lot of their decisions over the last couple of years. Hasn't always went great for them, but they've been really receptive to it and willing to, keep an open mind. And that's been, I think, the right approach, certainly. But when you have that structure in place and you can do things a certain way throughout the offseason program, and then throughout the season, you understand the ebbs and flows, and you understand how to keep guys motivated, and you prove that over multiple years. I mean, that's sort of what Bill Belichick has proven over a long time. That's what Andy Reid's proven over a long time. Obviously, I mean, I'm just sort of saying things that are sort of, kind of known, but I think Tomlin and Harbaugh have shown that enough that you have to have faith that those guys are going to be good and they're going to be stable. You also have to really like what the Bengals are doing. And I think you have to be somewhat optimistic about what Kevin Stefanski's been able to do in this regard. So, I mean, the AFC North does have good coaches. It does have, a lot of upside in the division. If Deshaun Watson is able to play really well, you can understand why every team in the division has at least an 8.5 over under, which again means they're 500 or better by their win total over under, at least the expectation. But should be a fun division as we see that play out. John, this is a fun one to get back into it. It's fun to chat with you again. It's fun to, I know, we got a lot of comments from the listeners, and I know I guess sort of already expecting some ones that say, hey, glad you guys are back on. And so I just want to say it's fun to talk to you guys again, the listeners. It'll be fun to hear that feedback. But man, like as we went through this, I'm like, man, we have a lot to catch up on. I have a lot of stuff that I want to talk about with you. There's a lot of takes to get out there. It's been a fun, it's been a rewarding couple of months off for me, as I mentioned at the top of the show. But yeah, we have a lot to discuss still, and so we'll be back at some point to continue to discuss. It won't be 2 months from now.
Yeah, we got quite a few shows planned over the very short term. We'll see if those all actually get done or not. It's a busy couple of weeks here as we head up for the draft. It was so much fun starting up again. As you mentioned, I mean, we just appreciate all the listeners. We appreciate all of you sticking with us. And obviously, if you're a new listener today, then that as well is very exciting. We'll have new episodes. The best way to make sure that you get those, regardless of what the tempo is to subscribe to the feed. And we'll be back with you shortly. As always, I'm Shawn Siegele. With me is Ben Gretch. You can follow at Yards Per Gretch. Make sure you sign up for Stealing Signals. Make sure you sign up for Stealing Lines. We'd love to have you over at RotoViz. And Ben, we'll be back in a couple days here, I think. See you guys then.